Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be looking at topics under the Study Island lesson, quadratic graphs, and topics under the standard 2.3b and 2.6c in Algebra 2. So what I've done is I've pulled questions from the quadratic graph section that you can do straight on the TI Plus calculator. So this might not include all of the questions, but these are the ones that you don't necessarily need a lot of paper and pencil, if any, work to do to answer them. So as you're going through these lessons and questions, if you could take notes and maybe pause and rewind so you can stay caught back up, write down the steps and which buttons I'm pressing to do them, and that way you have that to look back onto when you're trying these problems on your own and studying. So this first question gives you a graph and asks you which equation matches the graph. So what I can do is just graph each of these equations and see which one gives me this picture. So I'm going to go ahead and go into y equals, and I'm going to clear out anything that might be remaining in there. And I'm just going to put my first choice into y equals. So I'm going to do negative x, and I use this button right here beside alpha with the x at the beginning to get my x, squared minus 6x plus 8. And so I'm going to go ahead and graph that, but I want the window on my screen to match what is given to me in the problem. So I'm going to press window, and I notice in the problem it goes from negative 6 to positive 6 on the x-axis. So for the x-min, I'm going to put negative 6. And for the x max, I'm going to put positive 6. And I'm going to keep the scale, which means the tick marks at 1. So there's going to be a tick mark every number, just like there is in the graph. And then I notice the y-axis goes from negative 10 to positive 10, which is what's already written here, so I'm going to leave it be. So now I'm going to go ahead and press graph. And now I know that this picture needs to look like this one here, exactly. And it definitely doesn't. It looks like this parabola actually is a frown and going upside down. So A is not going to be my answer. So I'm going to go back into y equals, clear out y1, and put in choice B. So that's going to be x squared minus 6x plus 8. And my window still stays the same because I just set it and I haven't changed it. So I'm going to press graph. And there, that one looks pretty similar. So if I look at the x-axis, every tick mark is 1. It crosses at 1, 2, 3, 4. And on my answer here, it crosses at 2 and 4 also. And then here it crosses at 8, and if I count up my tick marks here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it also crosses the y-axis at 8. So that means B is probably going to be my answer. And that is the correct answer in this case. But what you could do is you could try out C and D also just to rule them out, and then you would know for sure that B is your answer. This next question asks how the parabola opens, and here's just a little bit of information. If this was equal to y squared minus 36, you can't just change that to an x when you put it into the equation here. These have to be x's here in these problems. And so if it was a y, this isn't one that you can do in the calculator. You just have to know how to do it. But since it's an x, I can do it in the calculator. So I'm going to press y equals, clear out what I have equal to y1, and put this time the x squared minus 36 in the problem. And I'm going to go back to that standard window, so I'm going to press zoom standard, so then it goes from negative 10 to positive 10 on both the x and y axis. And I'm looking here, and this parabola is opening up. And if you wanted to be able to see this whole thing, you could do zoom out, choice 3. And that way you can see all of the parabola, and you can see for sure that it is opening up. So A is going to be your final answer. So here you are looking at what is the x-intercept of this equation. So I can use the graphing calculator to do that. And first I'm going to have to make sure the equation is set equal to 0 to put it in now, and it is. So I'm good to go to just type x squared minus 5x minus 24 into the calculator. And so I'm going to go ahead and do back to that zoom standard so that I know I'm back to that standard window of -10 to +10 in both axes. And then I want to go ahead and graph the parabola. And so here's asking for the x-intercepts. And so to calculate the x-intercepts, I'm going to use this calc button here. Calc is written in blue, so I'm going to have to press second calc. And 0 is another word for x-intercept. So you need to know that 0 and x-intercepts the same thing. So I'm going to press 2 because that's what I want to know. And then I want to go to this first x-intercept, and I'm going to use the left and right arrows to get it so that the spider is to the left of that first x-intercept. So it is now, and I press enter and ask what's the right bound. So that means I'm going to move it to the right side of the x-intercept and press enter. And then guess means just to move it as close as I can to the x-intercept, press enter. And there it tells me that that first x-intercept is -3. So the only answer here that has -3 in it is A, but I just want to make sure I didn't make any mistakes, so I'm going to check the other one, x-intercept, and hope that it is 8. So you go through the same steps, second calc, choice 2 to calculate the other 0, and then I move the right arrow and left arrows so that the blinking little spider cursor is on the left of the second x-intercept. And when it is, I press enter, and I move it so it's on the right of it. And I know I did that correctly because those arrows are both pointing in at each other. If they were pointing out, that would mean I made a mistake and I'm going to get an error. And then my last question says guess, so I move it to as close as I can on top of the x-intercept and press enter. And 8 is that second x-intercept, so that means A is definitely going to be my final answer. This next equation asks us to calculate the minimum or maximum of the function below. So that means you're going to be looking at the top of a upside down parabola or the bottom of a right side up parabola in finding the y coordinates of that min or max point. So the first step is going to be to put this equation into y equals. So I pressed y equals and typed it in at y1. And then I'm going to go ahead and graph it, but I want to go zoom standard just to make sure I still have that correct window, just so I know what I'm looking at. And there I see the parabola is opening down. So I'm going to have to, since it's opening down, it's going to have a topmost point or a maximum point. And I want to calculate what that maximum is going to be. So I'm going to go into calculate above trace here. It's in blue, so I have to press second calc. And I'm calculating a maximum, so you have to know if you're looking for a max or min. So I'm looking for a max, so I'm going to press 4. And then I'm going to move my cursor so it's to the left of the max, and then move it so it's to the right of the max, and then move it so it's right over top, and that's how I answer those questions. And I press enter, and it tells me here the maximum, and it's just the y value that I need, is 4. And so that means the maximum of 4, choice B, is going to be my final answer. This next question gives us two functions and asks us to compare the min and max of them. So in order to do this, I'm going to go ahead and graph them. So I put both equations into y1 for the first one and y2 for the second one. And just so I can tell the difference between them, I'm going to make the second one's graph have a thicker line. So to do that, I move it with the cursors until it's blinking right in front of y2 over that line, and I press enter once. And you notice it's now a thicker line. That means when I go to graph, it'll be a thicker line for me to look at. And the first one will be a skinnier line. So I'm just going to go ahead and graph that and see if I can see something about the min and the max. So the first one has a maximum and the second one has a minimum. So I need to look for where it's talking about a maximum of f of x and a minimum of g of x. And so this one, the max for f of x, but they both have maximums. In D, I have a maximum of f of x, but a minimum of g of x, which is what I'm looking for. So it's probably going to be my answer, since there's only one that talks about the max of f of x and minimum of g of x. And if I look, they're at the same y value, so they are going to be the same. And so my final answer here is D. This next question asks to calculate the y-intercept of the quadratic below. So since this is already in function form, I can go ahead and just type this function into y1. The only thing you need to be careful of is that you're using the minus button here and not the negative button. The calculator isn't smart enough to know that when you write it, it looks the same. You have to make sure you use the correct buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and graph it. And when I do that, I can't see where it's crossing the y-axis. I can see that it's going to be really negative. But what I can do is I can just still go ahead and calculate it without having to see it. If you wanted to see it though, you could press zoom out, which is choice 3, and enter. And it's going to zoom out so you can see more of the graph. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to press second calculate. And this time, there isn't a choice here that says y-intercept, so I'm going to choose that first choice value. And so it gives me, I can type in any x value and find out what the y value is going to be for this graph. So here, anytime you're finding a y-intercept, the x value is always going to be 0. That's something you need to know, so a little bit of vocabulary you might need to study. So I'm going to press 0 here and enter. And it's going to tell me that the y-intercept is negative 36. So that means letter A is going to be my final answer. This next question asks you to find the axis of symmetry, of this function. And so here you do need to know that the axis of symmetry is equal to the x value of the min or max. So we're going to be calculating the min or max again, but this time looking at the x value for the axis of symmetry. So I'm going to go ahead and put this function into my y1, which I already did. Be careful to use the minus sign here instead of the negative sign. And I'm going to go zoom standard and choice 6 so that I can see the beginning of the parabola. So here I can't see the minimum of the parabola. It's down here somewhere. So I'm going to have to zoom out until I can see it. So I'm going to go just plain zoom. Zoom out is choice 3, and I press enter. And so I can see almost to that maximum point. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my window, and I'm just going to make the y-axis go down a little bit further so that I can see the whole thing. And so now I can see where that maximum is, and the minimum is, and I'm going to go into the second calculate menu. And because it's a smile parabola, it's opening up, I'm going to have a minimum value, so I'm going to press 3 to find the minimum. And then I'm going to use my right and left arrows to scroll until I'm to the left of that minimum and press enter. And then use the right arrows to scroll until I'm to the right of that minimum and press enter. And then it says guess, so I'm going to move it until it's as close as possible to the minimum. Press enter. And here, the x value is negative 3 of the minimum, so that means my axis of symmetry equation is going to be x equals negative 3, which is choice D. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.